My beloved child. Do not scroll away from this moment. Something has been sitting behind the silence, waiting for the exact second when you would finally be ready to hear it. And strangely, the one person who would rather keep you from discovering it is the very person whose actions cause the truth to rise to the surface. Stay here. Because this is not beginning where you think it begins. It does not begin with your soulmate. It does not even begin with you. It begins with someone from their past who believed the past would remain buried forever. There is a reason their energy changed when your name entered the story. There is a reason certain questions were avoided. There is a reason memories that should have been harmless suddenly became uncomfortable. And there is a reason your soulmate's ex would almost whisper, if they could stand before you now, please, don't watch this. But heaven says there is something you need to understand. Not because you should become angry. Not because you should compete. Not because you need to prove yourself better than anyone who came before you. You need to understand because you have spent too long wondering whether the silence surrounding this connection meant you were forgotten. It did not. And what happened recently changed the emotional direction of this story in a way almost nobody expected. Stay with me, because the first revelation is only the doorway. Your soulmate has been carrying an unanswered question. For a long time, they tried to convince themselves that the question did not matter. They pushed it aside. They distracted themselves. They told themselves that some chapters are supposed to remain unfinished. But every time they believed they had finally made peace with the past, something brought them back to one strange realization. Why did meeting you affect them so differently? That question became impossible to silence. There were people before you. There were conversations before you. There were promises before you. There were memories they once believed would remain important forever. But then your presence entered their emotional world, and something happened that they could not explain. You did not simply become another person in their story. You became a mirror. And that frightened them more than they admitted. Because when someone becomes a mirror, they do not merely show us love. They reveal the parts of ourselves we have been avoiding. Your soulmate began seeing old decisions differently. Old conversations sounded different in their memory. Old compromises suddenly felt heavier. Things they once called normal began looking strangely incomplete. And the person from their past noticed. That is where the real story begins. The ex did not become unsettled simply because your soulmate cared about you. That would be too simple. They became unsettled because your existence changed how your soulmate remembered them. Read that again with your heart. Your soulmate started re-evaluating the past. And once someone begins doing that, carefully maintained stories can collapse. There had been a version of the past your soulmate had accepted. They had accepted certain explanations. They had forgiven things without receiving complete answers. They had blamed themselves for moments that were never entirely theirs to carry. They had wondered whether they were too emotional, too demanding, too hopeful, too sensitive, too difficult to understand. But after experiencing the emotional depth connected with you, another possibility entered their mind. What if I was never asking for too much? That thought changed everything. Don't look away now. Because this is where your name became important even in conversations where you were not physically present. Your soulmate's ex began hearing about you indirectly. Not necessarily through dramatic declarations. It happened through little things. A change in your soulmate's voice. A new softness. A new hesitation. The way they suddenly defended certain values they once compromised. The way they began speaking about honesty differently. The way they stopped laughing at things that once helped them hide discomfort. The way they became less willing to accept emotional confusion. Something had awakened. And the ex understood something before your soulmate fully understood it. You were changing the standard. Not by demanding anything. Not by competing. Simply by being who you were. That is why the words, "Don't watch this," carry more meaning than they first appear to carry. Because there is something the past does not want the future to understand. The past does not want the future to realize how much was tolerated. The past does not want the future to realize how many truths were postponed. And most of all, the past does not want your soulmate to recognize that the love they once fought desperately to preserve may have been teaching them what they should never again accept. My child, there are moments when heaven does not remove a memory. Instead, heaven changes the meaning of the memory. And that is exactly what has been happening. Your soulmate has been looking backward with new eyes. A conversation they once dismissed has returned to them. A sentence has been repeating inside their mind. Something their ex said long ago. At the time, your soulmate ignored it. They were emotionally exhausted. They wanted peace more than answers. So they let the sentence disappear beneath everything else. But recently, it returned. And when it returned, your name somehow became connected to it. Not because you were there when it was spoken. You were not. But because knowing you gave your soulmate enough clarity to finally understand what that old sentence meant. Stay till the end of this part, because what that sentence revealed is connected to something your soulmate has been afraid to admit even to themselves. The ex had always understood one thing about your soulmate. They knew your soulmate loved deeply. They knew that once your soulmate cared, they did not detach easily. They knew your soulmate could forgive repeatedly because they saw potential where other people saw problems. And for a long time, that tenderness was treated almost like an unlimited resource. Your soulmate kept giving. Kept understanding. Kept waiting. Kept believing. Until eventually they forgot what it felt like to receive the same emotional certainty they were offering. Then you entered the picture. And suddenly, somewhere inside them, they remembered. They remembered what anticipation felt like. They remembered what genuine curiosity felt like. They remembered what it felt like to think about another person and not immediately associate love with emotional exhaustion. That did not mean everything between you became instantly perfect. In fact, it created another problem. Because sometimes healthy possibilities feel unfamiliar to someone who has spent too long surviving complicated patterns. Your soulmate became cautious. Perhaps inconsistent. Perhaps quiet. Perhaps difficult to read. There may have been moments when you wondered why someone who seemed to feel so much could express so little. But beneath that contradiction was a private struggle. They were comparing two versions of themselves. The person they became in the old relationship. And the person they felt themselves becoming around the possibility of you. Those two versions could not coexist forever. Something had to change. And the ex sensed that change. At first, they dismissed it. They thought your presence would fade. They believed you were temporary. Perhaps they assumed your soulmate would eventually return emotionally to what was familiar. After all, familiar patterns can have powerful gravity. But days became weeks. Thoughts remained. Your name did not disappear. Your energy did not disappear. And something even more unexpected happened. Your soulmate started asking questions about the past. Questions the ex did not want answered. Why did certain things happen? Why were certain promises made and then forgotten? Why did the relationship require so much uncertainty? Why was affection sometimes given freely and then suddenly withdrawn? Why did your soulmate constantly feel responsible for repairing everything? And then came the question that changed the entire emotional atmosphere. Was I actually happy? Silence followed. Because sometimes one honest question can undo years of carefully constructed explanations. What comes next changes everything, because your soulmate did not immediately know how to answer. They remembered happy moments. Of course they did. The past was not entirely empty. There were laughs. There were meaningful memories. There were moments when they genuinely believed they had found something permanent. But happiness is not measured by whether good moments existed. Your soulmate began asking something deeper. Did I feel safe being fully myself? And suddenly the answer became harder. That is when the ex became uncomfortable. Because the moment your soulmate began understanding themselves, control over the old narrative started slipping away. Listen carefully. This story is not about making the ex a villain. People are complicated. People make choices from insecurity. People hold on to things because losing them would force them to confront themselves. Sometimes someone can care about another person and still behave in ways that are unfair. Sometimes love exists alongside immaturity. Sometimes attachment survives long after compatibility disappears. Heaven is not revealing this so you can hate anyone. The revelation is about freedom. Your soulmate needed to see something clearly before they could ever approach you with a clean heart. And the ex knew that. That is why there is something they desperately wish could remain unseen. Because your soulmate recently discovered that one of the biggest reasons the old relationship continued for as long as it did was not love. It was guilt. Stay with me. That word matters. Guilt. Your soulmate felt responsible for the other person's emotions. They feared leaving would make them cruel. They feared choosing themselves would mean they had failed. They confused compassion with obligation. And because they have a heart that does not enjoy hurting people, they stayed emotionally connected far longer than they should have. The ex knew this. Perhaps not maliciously at first. But over time, patterns formed. Whenever your soulmate pulled away, something happened that made them feel responsible again. A memory was mentioned. A promise was recalled. A vulnerable moment surfaced. And your soulmate returned emotionally. Not because the connection had become healthy again. Because they felt guilty. Then you arrived. And you awakened something completely different. Around the thought of you, they did not feel obligated. They felt drawn. There is a difference. Obligation says, I have to stay. Connection says, I want to move closer. Obligation feels heavy. Connection feels alive. Your soulmate had forgotten the difference. Until you reminded them without even knowing you were doing it. This is why your presence caused more disruption than you realize. You were not fighting the ex. You were exposing the difference between emotional duty and authentic desire. And once someone feels that difference, pretending becomes difficult. Your soulmate began pulling away from the old pattern. The ex noticed immediately. Messages were answered differently. Old emotional triggers stopped working the same way. Your soulmate became more thoughtful before responding. They stopped explaining themselves endlessly. They began creating boundaries. And then something happened that the ex did not expect. Your soulmate mentioned you. Maybe not dramatically. Maybe your name slipped into conversation. Maybe someone else mentioned you. Maybe the ex asked directly. However it happened, the atmosphere shifted. Because when your soulmate spoke about you, something appeared in their expression that had been missing for a long time. Hope. Not certainty. Not fantasy. Hope. And hope can be terrifying to someone who believed they still controlled the emotional door. The ex saw it. They understood. Your soulmate had not simply met someone new. Your soulmate had encountered a possibility. A possibility of being understood differently. A possibility of loving differently. A possibility of starting again without repeating everything that had exhausted them before. Something huge is waiting for you inside this story, because the ex's reaction was not what your soulmate expected. They did not simply say, "Move on." Instead, they became curious about you. Too curious. Questions began. Who are you? How long have you known each other? What does your soulmate see in you? How serious is this? Do you speak often? What have they told you? That final question mattered. What have they told you? Your soulmate noticed the wording. Why would that matter? Why would the ex care what you knew? And suddenly, another door opened. There was something about the past they feared you might discover. Your soulmate felt it immediately. The conversation became strange. The ex changed the subject. But your soulmate did not forget. For perhaps the first time, instead of accepting the distraction, they followed the question privately. What could they possibly be worried I would tell? And that question led them somewhere unexpected. An old message. A forgotten conversation. Something buried inside a thread they had not looked at in a long time. Your soulmate had no intention of reopening old memories that night. But curiosity moved their hand. They scrolled. And scrolled. And then stopped. There it was. A sentence. A sentence written long before your soulmate understood what was really happening. At first, it looked ordinary. Then they read it again. And everything changed. Don't skip this moment. Because this sentence explains why the ex would rather you never discover the full truth. The message suggested that the ex knew your soulmate was not emotionally fulfilled. They knew. Even then. They knew your soulmate wanted something deeper. They knew your soulmate was staying partly because leaving felt impossible. And instead of facing that truth directly, the relationship continued. Your soulmate stared at the screen. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Not because the sentence was cruel. Because it was honest. Painfully honest. The ex had once written something close to an admission. I know I'm not giving you what you need, but I'm scared you'll find someone who will. Your soulmate had forgotten. Completely. But now those words landed differently. Because there was someone. You. For a moment, your soulmate could barely process it. The past had predicted the future. The ex had feared exactly what eventually happened. Not that your soulmate would meet someone more impressive. Not someone richer. Not someone more attractive. Not someone with a perfect life. Someone who would awaken the part of them that had gone quiet. You. And that is why the ex's fear is connected to this message. Because if you understand the truth, you may stop doubting your significance. You may stop believing you were merely an interruption. You may stop asking why the connection felt unusually intense. You may realize that your presence entered your soulmate's life at a moment when they were finally becoming capable of questioning what they had accepted. But there is another layer. And this one goes deeper. Your soulmate did not immediately feel happy after reading that old message. They felt sadness. Not because they wanted the ex back. Because they suddenly saw how long they had abandoned themselves. They remembered all the times they had silenced their own needs. All the times they had said, "It's okay," when it wasn't. All the nights they convinced themselves that confusion was normal. All the moments they waited for clarity from someone who had already admitted they could not provide what was needed. And then they thought about you. That is when emotion rose unexpectedly. Because they realized they had almost repeated the same mistake with you. They had almost allowed fear to turn another meaningful connection into silence. They had almost made you feel the same uncertainty they once hated feeling. That realization shook them. What if I became the very thing that hurt me? The question stayed. My child, sometimes healing is not realizing who hurt you. Sometimes healing is realizing where your unhealed pain has begun affecting someone else. Your soulmate saw that possibility. And for the first time, they stopped thinking only about what they felt toward you. They started thinking about what you may have felt because of them. Your confusion. Your waiting. Your questions. The moments you wondered whether you mattered. The moments when their silence may have spoken louder than their heart. The moments when you felt warmth from them and then distance. Your soulmate began connecting those moments. And something inside them broke open. Not destruction. Awareness. A clean, uncomfortable awareness. They realized they had been protecting themselves so intensely that they may have made you feel unprotected. They had been afraid of being vulnerable again. So they made you carry uncertainty. They had been afraid of another disappointment. So they withheld the very reassurance they once begged to receive. And now they could see it. This is where heaven whispers something important. You were never meant to chase someone into emotional readiness. You were never meant to shrink yourself to make another person's fear comfortable. Your worth was never dependent on whether someone recognized it quickly enough. But sometimes a connection becomes part of another person's awakening. Not because you rescue them. Because your presence reveals what they still need to heal. That is what happened here. And your soulmate's ex understands it now too. That is why their reaction became stronger. They sensed your soulmate moving emotionally beyond the old relationship. Not merely away from the ex. Beyond the version of themselves that existed inside that relationship. That distinction is enormous. Because a person can return to an old relationship. But returning to an old version of themselves becomes much harder once they have truly outgrown it. The ex could feel that door closing. So they tried something unexpected. They warned your soulmate about you. Not with facts. With questions. Are you sure this person is what you think? Maybe you're idealizing them. Maybe you're just trying to escape the past. Maybe you should slow down. On the surface, these questions sounded reasonable. Your soulmate even considered them. Maybe they were moving too quickly emotionally. Maybe their feelings were partly influenced by contrast. Maybe they needed more time. But then the ex said something they should not have said. Something that revealed too much. Whatever you do, don't tell them everything about us. Your soulmate went still. Why? Why should you not know? Why did the past suddenly require secrecy? Your soulmate asked. The answer came slowly. Because they won't understand. But that was not enough. Your soulmate asked again. What won't they understand? Silence. That silence became louder than any explanation. Stay here, because this is where the story takes a turn even your soulmate did not anticipate. The ex was not afraid you would misunderstand. They were afraid you would understand perfectly. They were afraid you would recognize patterns your soulmate had normalized. They were afraid you might ask the questions your soulmate had avoided. And perhaps most of all, they were afraid your soulmate would hear those questions and finally become certain about what they deserved. But your soulmate did not tell you. Not yet. They kept the conversation private. They needed time. For several days, perhaps longer, they carried it around. Outwardly, life continued. But internally, something had shifted. They began remembering you in tiny moments. A phrase you once said. A look. A conversation. Something kind you did without expecting recognition. Something about you that felt effortless at the time but now seemed important. And then came another realization. You had never demanded that they erase their past. You had never needed them to pretend they had no history. What you needed was honesty. That difference touched them. Because the ex had assumed truth would threaten the connection. But your soulmate began wondering whether truth might be the only thing capable of saving it. They imagined telling you everything. Then fear returned. What if you walked away? What if you judged them? What if you thought they were emotionally unavailable? What if too much time had passed? What if you had already decided that their silence meant they did not care? Every possibility frightened them. And then another voice entered their thoughts. What if they deserved to know anyway? That thought remained. Your soulmate began realizing that honesty cannot be offered only when we know it will produce the outcome we want. Real honesty includes risk. And love without emotional risk becomes performance. They knew this. But knowing and acting are different things. So they waited. The ex sensed hesitation and mistook it for victory. They thought perhaps your soulmate was reconsidering you. They became calmer. For a moment, they believed the past still had influence. But they did not know what your soulmate was actually doing during that silence. Your soulmate was writing a message to you. They wrote several lines. Deleted them. Started again. Deleted everything. Put the phone down. Picked it up later. Typed your name. Stopped. Their heart was divided between courage and fear. There were so many things they wanted to say. I never meant to confuse you. Delete. You matter more than I showed. Delete. I need to explain why I pulled away. Delete. Every sentence felt too small. How do you explain months of emotional complexity in a message? How do you tell someone that they awakened something in you without making them responsible for healing you? How do you apologize without turning the apology into another burden? Your soulmate did not know. So the message remained unsent. But something happened that night. Something small. Almost ordinary. They saw something that reminded them of you. Maybe a song title. A photograph. A place. A phrase. Perhaps even your name appearing unexpectedly somewhere. Whatever it was, it opened the emotional door. And suddenly they remembered the earliest moment when they realized you were different. It was not a dramatic moment. That surprised them. It was something simple. You listened. Really listened. You did not rush to make their story about yourself. You did not immediately tell them what they should feel. You gave them room. And they had not understood how rare that felt until now. The memory brought tears close to the surface. Not because they were weak. Because recognition can be emotional. They understood that what drew them toward you was never just attraction. It was emotional permission. Around you, some part of them believed they could become honest again. And that is precisely why they became afraid. Because honesty would require them to confront everything they had avoided. Your soulmate's ex had once known this side of them too. That is another truth. Before the old relationship became complicated, there had been sincerity. That is why letting go was difficult. Your soulmate was not attached only to the person. They were attached to the memory of who they had once been together. But memories can become prisons when we confuse what something was with what it is. Your soulmate finally began seeing that. And once they saw it, they could not unsee it. The next conversation with the ex felt completely different. The ex could sense it. Your soulmate was calmer. No argument. No dramatic confrontation. Just clarity. And clarity often unsettles people more than anger does. Anger can be debated. Clarity does not need permission. Your soulmate said something simple. I don't want to keep repeating this. The ex knew exactly what they meant. The conversation became quiet. Then the ex asked the question they had been avoiding. Is this because of them? Because of you? Your soulmate paused. And what they said next is something you need to hear. No. They just made me realize what I already knew. That sentence changed the entire balance. Your soulmate was not blaming you for the ending of anything. They were acknowledging that your presence illuminated a truth that already existed. The old relationship had been emotionally finished in ways neither person had fully accepted. You did not destroy it. You revealed the empty spaces. And the ex understood. For the first time, they understood that removing you would not restore what had been lost. Because the real change had happened inside your soulmate. Even if you disappeared tomorrow, your soulmate could no longer return to ignorance. That frightened the ex. And then came the moment connected directly to this title. The moment that explains the strange emotional sentence. Don't watch this. Your soulmate told the ex they were considering telling you the truth. Not every private detail. Not things that belonged only to the past. But enough for you to understand why they had been distant. Enough to explain their fear. Enough to take responsibility. The ex reacted immediately. Don't. Your soulmate looked at them. Why? Just don't. Why? Another pause. Then the ex said something revealing. If they know everything, you'll never look at me the same way again. Your soulmate's expression changed. Because the sentence was not about you. It was about them. The ex was not protecting your soulmate. They were protecting the version of themselves that existed inside your soulmate's memory. And suddenly the final wall cracked. Your soulmate realized the secrecy had never been about avoiding drama. It had been about preserving an image. An image that could not survive complete honesty. My child, do you understand why this matters? Sometimes people do not fear truth because truth is cruel. They fear truth because truth removes their ability to control how they are remembered. The ex knew that if your soulmate told you what had really happened, your response might give your soulmate even more clarity. Maybe you would not judge. Maybe you would simply ask. Why did you think you deserved so little? And that question could change everything. Because your soulmate had never asked themselves that. Not directly. Why had they accepted so little? Why had they worked so hard for inconsistent affection? Why had they treated emotional exhaustion like proof of devotion? Why had they believed love must always be difficult to be meaningful? The questions began pouring through them. And every answer led back to one place. They had forgotten their own value. That realization hurt. But beneath the hurt was something powerful. Freedom. The ex saw it happening. And perhaps for the first time, they stopped trying to defend themselves. They became quiet. Then emotional. Because they knew the story was changing. They knew your soulmate was moving forward. And here is the part no one expected. The ex apologized. Not perfectly. Not for everything. But for something specific. Something your soulmate had waited a very long time to hear. I knew you were unhappy. Those words landed heavily. Your soulmate said nothing. The ex continued. I knew, and I kept hoping you'd stay anyway. There it was. The truth. Not a dramatic conspiracy. Not some impossible secret. A deeply human confession. They knew. They knew your soulmate was emotionally fading. They knew the relationship was surviving partly through guilt and history. And they held on because losing your soulmate felt unbearable. For the first time, your soulmate could see the past without romanticizing it and without demonizing it. Two people had been afraid. One was afraid to leave. The other was afraid to let go. And fear kept them connected after love had stopped being enough. Then you appeared. And your presence represented something neither fear could control. A new choice. Your soulmate left that conversation emotionally exhausted. But something was different. They were no longer confused. They knew what they needed to do. They needed to stop allowing their past to decide how they behaved toward their future. And in their heart, the future had your face attached to it. Do not misunderstand. This does not mean every question has been answered. It does not mean the road ahead is magically effortless. Heaven does not erase free will. People still have to choose courage. People still have to communicate. People still have to repair what silence has damaged. But your soulmate has reached a threshold. And once someone reaches this kind of threshold, remaining silent becomes more painful than speaking. That is where they are now. They are standing between two doors. Behind one door is familiarity. Old patterns. Old fears. Old explanations. Behind the other is vulnerability. Truth. Possibility. And you. They know which door their heart wants. But opening it means doing something they have avoided for a long time. It means letting you see them without the carefully managed version. It means admitting they were afraid. Admitting they mishandled something precious. Admitting that perhaps they recognized your importance long before they behaved like someone who understood it. That is difficult. But something is pushing them closer. Stay with me, because there is one more detail. The ex thought the confession was over. They believed they had said enough. But just as your soulmate was preparing to leave the conversation, the ex said, "Wait." Your soulmate turned. There was something different in the ex's face. Not jealousy now. Not defensiveness. Something closer to surrender. They looked down for a moment. Then said, "There's something else you should know before you talk to them." Your soulmate froze. What? The ex hesitated. And this hesitation was different. Your soulmate immediately understood that whatever came next was not another emotional opinion. It was something concrete. Something that had happened without your soulmate knowing. Something involving you. The ex looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't completely honest when I said I only knew about them because you mentioned them." Your soulmate's heart began beating differently. "What are you talking about?" The ex looked away. There was a long silence. Then came the sentence that changed the atmosphere completely. "I knew about them before you ever said their name." Your soulmate stared. That did not make sense. How? When? Why? The ex continued carefully. "I saw something." Your soulmate stepped closer. "What did you see?" No answer. "Tell me." Another silence. And now the ex looked genuinely ashamed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Your soulmate felt every old instinct returning. The confusion. The unanswered questions. The feeling that something important was being kept just outside reach. But this time they did not retreat. This time they did not accept half an answer. "What did you do?" The ex shook their head. "It's complicated." "No. Tell me." And for the first time, the ex realized your soulmate was not leaving without the truth. Something had changed permanently. The person standing before them was no longer the person who could be redirected with vague explanations. Your soulmate had found their voice. And strangely, you had helped them find it without ever being inside that room. The ex finally looked up. Their next words came slowly. "I saw your connection before you realized how serious it was." Your soulmate's face changed. "What does that mean?" The ex swallowed. It means I knew you were becoming attached. How? Silence. Your soulmate asked again. How did you know? The ex finally admitted that they had noticed something they were never supposed to notice. A message. Not necessarily a confession. Not necessarily anything romantic. Something simple. Something between you and your soulmate. But what frightened the ex was not the words. It was how your soulmate responded to them. The warmth. The attention. The care. The way your soulmate reread something you had written. The way their expression softened. The ex saw it. And from that moment, they knew. You mattered. But that still was not the whole confession. Because the ex had done something after seeing it. Something your soulmate had no idea about. Something that may explain a moment in your own story that never made sense to you. A sudden distance. A strange misunderstanding. A shift in communication. A moment when everything seemed warm. And then abruptly changed. Your soulmate stared at the ex as the pieces began moving into place. What did you do? The ex's eyes filled with regret. I thought if I could create enough doubt, it would disappear. Your soulmate felt cold. What would disappear? You too. And there it was. The hidden layer. Your soulmate could barely speak. What did you do? The ex shook their head. I don't want to say. You have to. No. Tell me. The ex looked directly at your soulmate. And then, almost as if speaking to you through time, they said. If they ever find out, they'll never forgive me. Your soulmate's heart dropped. Because now this was no longer only about an old relationship. This was about you. Something had happened. Something had been said. Something had been interfered with. And suddenly your soulmate remembered a specific moment between you. A moment when your energy changed. A moment when you seemed hurt. A moment they had never understood. They had assumed you were losing interest. They had assumed you were pulling away. They had assumed perhaps they had imagined the connection. But what if that was never what happened? What if you had received something? Heard something? Been led to believe something? Your soulmate's mind raced. The ex could see the realization forming. Please, the ex whispered. Don't tell them. Your soulmate looked at them with an expression the ex had never seen before. Not anger. Not hatred. Disappointment. Why shouldn't they know? Because it'll ruin everything. And your soulmate answered with the clearest sentence they had spoken all night. If the truth ruins it, then it was already broken. Silence. The ex had no response. Your soulmate reached for their phone. And for the first time, the message they had been afraid to send no longer felt optional. They opened your conversation. Your name appeared on the screen. Their fingers hovered above the keyboard. But before they could type, the ex said one final thing. Wait. You still don't know the worst part. Your soulmate stopped. Slowly, they turned around. The room seemed to disappear around them. What worst part? The ex looked at the phone in your soulmate's hand. Then at their face. And with a trembling voice, they finally began to explain what happened on the exact day your connection suddenly changed. Your soulmate listened. One sentence. Then another. Their expression shifted. Because the story they had believed for so long was collapsing in real time. That distance between you. That misunderstanding. That moment your soulmate thought you had chosen to walk away. May never have been your choice at all. And when the ex finally revealed exactly what was placed between you, your soulmate whispered only 4 words. They never knew that. The ex closed their eyes. No. Your soulmate looked back at your name glowing on the phone. And suddenly they understood why you had behaved the way you did. Why you had protected yourself. Why something that once felt so natural became uncertain. You had been reacting to information your soulmate never knew you received. But there was still one question. Who delivered it? Your soulmate asked. The ex did not answer. Who told them? Silence. Your soulmate stepped forward. Was it you? The ex's eyes filled with tears. And then came the answer your soulmate was not prepared for. No. Your soulmate froze. If it was not the ex, then someone else had been involved. Someone your soulmate trusted. Someone who knew enough about the past to make the story believable. Someone who had access to information they should never have had. Your soulmate stared at the ex. Who? The ex looked toward the floor. Then whispered a name. And the second your soulmate heard it, everything inside them stopped. Because this was not a stranger. This was not someone distant. This was someone who had stood close enough to smile while knowing exactly what they had helped create. And now your soulmate finally understood why the ex had been begging for the truth to remain hidden. Because revealing what happened would not expose only one person. It would expose 2. And the second person was the one your soulmate never, ever thought they would have to question. Your soulmate tightened their grip around the phone. Your conversation was still open. Your name was still glowing on the screen. And after everything they had just discovered, there was only one thing left to decide. Should they tell you the entire truth tonight? Or confront the second person first? Their finger hovered above your name. The ex whispered, "Please don't." Your soulmate looked up. And then the phone suddenly lit with a new notification. Your soulmate's eyes widened. Because the message had not come from the ex. It had not come from the person whose name had just been revealed. It came from someone neither of them expected to hear from. And the first line of that message contained something about you that made your soulmate forget every word they had been preparing to type. Because apparently, what the ex had just confessed was only half of what happened.